Hi, it's Josh Marshall from TPM Media. It's Tuesday, February 26, 2008. As you know, John McCain is a straight shooter and pretty much the king of campaign finance reform. So it may surprise you to find out that the Republican chairman of the Federal Elections Commission, the FEC, is now saying that John McCain is breaking the law in trying to opt out of the public financing system. Now, how could that be, you say? We're going to explain it to you today, even though it's pretty complicated, but hang in there with us and we'll get you through. Now, let's rewind back to August. You remember, this is when John McCain's campaign was completely in the dumps on life support, and at that time, he decided to opt into the public financing system for the primaries. And as you know, that means public money, federal tax dollars, in exchange for agreeing to spending limits. That meant he would get a little more than $5 million, real cash, for a campaign that was doing as badly as McCain's was, in exchange for agreeing to a limit of spending $54 million over the course of the primary season. Now fast forward to December. Remember, at this point, Mitt Romney was starting to tank. Things weren't going well for Mitt. And it actually seemed like a few people might vote for John McCain. The only problem is he still had absolutely no money. So he needed to go and get a loan to keep his campaign alive in advance of New Hampshire. So who's going to loan John McCain's campaign $1 million? Well, it turns out he's got some pretty good collateral. The federal government owes him more than $5 million that he's going to get in the beginning, the early months of 2008. So he can just go to the bank and say, hey, I've got more than $5 million coming, so give me $1 million now, I'll pay you back then. But alas, there was a problem. Now, John McCain, one thing you can say for the guy, is always thinking ahead. And what turned out is that if John McCain used that federal money as collateral to secure the new $1 million loan back in December, that would mean he couldn't later change his mind and opt back out of the public financing system. Because that would mean he'd already really used the money, even though he didn't have the cash in hand. Now, everybody agrees that this is the case, but here's the situation that McCain was facing. If I use that money as collateral to get my $1 million loan and then I end up winning the nomination, then I'll have to actually abide by those spending limits, and I don't want to do that. So McCain found a way to hedge his bets. Now, McCain's got a very sharp campaign finance lawyer, a guy named Trevor Potter. He actually used to serve as the chairman of the FEC. So here's the workaround they came up with. McCain wouldn't make the guarantee collateral, but he promised that if his campaign tanked, he would later opt out of the federal system and then opt back in. This would mean remaining a candidate even after he knew he wasn't really in the race, in order to do two things. A, get back the public money to pay his creditors off, and B, assure he could sign that original loan note with the de facto collateral while nonetheless maintaining his ability to once again opt out of the public financing system at any one of many possible future junctures at which his campaign might pop back from life support, and it would then be in his interest to go back to raising money the old-fashioned way from donors. Now let's fast forward to last month, January. You remember Mitt Romney tanked in Iowa and he blew it in New Hampshire, and then Mike Huckabee, McCain's other rival, just couldn't make it happen in South Carolina. And pretty much after Florida and then Super Tuesday, it was very clear John McCain was the Republican nominee. So he didn't want to stay with those limits anymore. He wanted to keep spending and spending, maybe use a little of that money against Barack Obama, basically do whatever he wants and have as much money as he wants until the Republican convention this summer. So what did he decide to do? He decided to go back and make good on that option that he'd always left for himself back in December and opt out of the public financing system altogether. But here's the problems got started and where the couple of wheels fell off the Straight Talk Express. The records of that squirrely loan of McCain's became public a little more than a week ago, and when people started to look, they saw just how squirrely an arrangement it was and how John McCain was using that federal money for collateral, and really there probably wasn't a way that he could later decide to opt out. At least that's what a lot of lawyers think, although he's got a pretty clever lawyer himself, and you know, it's up for some debate. Problem is, there's a guy named David Mason, and he is the Republican chairman of the Federal Elections Commission, and he went to McCain and said, dude, sorry, you can't just opt right out. You can only opt out of the public financing system when we, the FEC, say you can opt out. And I'm looking at this squirrely loan you have, and I'm not so sure you can. So before you opt out, we've got to take a look at this and decide whether you can do that. Now, the FEC is the government body that is charged with enforcing the campaign finance laws. So you'd think at this point, McCain would say, all right, you know, hey, if that's what you say, that's what I'll do. I'm going to follow the law. But it's not what happened. McCain is saying, you know, you say that, my guy says that, too bad, I'll do what I want. Now, hold it right there. There's one more detail we have to explain to you to understand the state of affairs right now, and that is what's happening with the Federal Elections Commission. It turns out that new nominees to the FCC are currently held up because of ongoing wrangling about the U.S. Attorney scandal from last year. President Bush wants to put one of the U.S. Attorney scandal bamboozlers on the FEC. Democrats say no, so it's all a train wreck. And right now, there's not a full complement of commissioners at the FEC. So John McCain is basically making two arguments. The first is he looks at the FEC and says, hey, you know what? There's not a full complement of commissioners even there. So chairman, you call yourself chairman, but the bottom line is you're not really the FEC right now because there's not enough commissioners there, and so you can't tell me what to do, so, blow it out your ass, and I'm just going to go ahead and keep spending. Now, if that doesn't pan out, he's got a second argument, and that is that the FEC's power to decide when John McCain can and can't opt out of the campaign finance system is actually unconstitutional. So either this chairman doesn't have standing or authority to tell John McCain what to do because there's not enough commissioners, or if that doesn't work, this chairman doesn't have authority because the whole system is unconstitutional and John McCain can just do whatever he wants. So that's where it stands right now. The Republican chairman of the FEC says to John McCain, can't do what you're doing, can't keep spending money. John McCain is saying to the Republican chairman of the FEC, you and what army? You can definitely expect this controversy to heat up because there's a lot of money at stake and a lot at stake about how this campaign turns out over the next several months. So we'll keep watching it for you and we'll bring you new updates and details. I'm Josh Marshall from TPM Media, and we'll talk to you tomorrow.